The afternoon was cold and gray. A light rain tapped against the tall windows of the train station. People hurried past one another, their heads down, lost in their phones, their thoughts, or their own busy worlds. Grand Central Station was always loud, buzzing with voices, echoing footsteps, rolling luggage, and the constant announcements from the speakers. But no one paid attention to the old upright piano placed near the corner, close to a small coffee shop. It had been there for years, donated by someone long forgotten. Now it mostly stood ignored, dusty, and a little out of tune. People barely even noticed it anymore. That was until he showed up. A man walked slowly through the crowd, unnoticed at first. He wore a plain brown coat that was too large for his thin frame, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His suitcase looked used, scratched at the edges, and his shoes were worn. To anyone watching, he looked like an old traveler, or maybe even a drifter, just another face in the crowd. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. In fact, he walked as if he had no destination at all. The man stopped near the piano and stared at it for a long time, his eyes hidden under the cap. Seemed to search for something in the scratched wooden frame and faded black and white keys. He looked lost in time, as though the piano had unlocked a memory he hadn't visited in years. Slowly, he walked toward it and sat down on the small wooden bench. The piano creaked under his weight, and a few people looked over briefly, but no one said anything. The man lifted his hands over the keys but didn't play yet. His fingers hovered, trembling slightly, as if afraid to touch them. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For a few seconds, the noise of the station seemed to fade away, at least for him. He was not just sitting at a public piano. Was sitting in the middle of a memory. What no one around him knew was that this man was not just an ordinary traveler. His name was Daniel Crestwood, though very few would recognize him by face. Years ago, he had been one of the richest men in America. Tech genius who created a billion-dollar company before turning 30. But then, he vanished from the spotlight. No interviews, no public appearances, nothing. He simply disappeared from the world he had once ruled. Daniel had everything once. Fame, influence, but he also had love. He had fallen in love with a young jazz singer named Emily when he was just 22. She sang in small clubs and speakeasies, full of life and light. She wasn't impressed by money or power. She loved music, passion, and people who were true to themselves. Daniel wrote her a song back then, a beautiful piece called The Willow's Promise. He had composed it just for her. No recordings, no sheet music, just memory. But time, like always, pulled them apart. Daniel became obsessed with success. He promised Emily that once he made it, once he was ready, they would settle down. He thought he had time, but he was wrong. Emily died in a car accident just days before he planned to propose. She was only 26. After that, Daniel walked away from the world he had built. The money didn't matter anymore. Fame felt meaningless. The song he wrote for her was never played again, buried it deep inside, along with his grief. Now, after decades, he sat at a public piano, staring at those keys like they were the gates to his past. A child nearby pointed at him. "Mom, that man's gonna play the piano." The mother smiled but didn't pay much attention. People walked past without stopping, but a few turned their heads out of curiosity. After all, it was rare to see someone so focused at that old piano. Finally, Daniel placed his fingers gently on the keys. The first note came soft and hesitant, then another, then a few more. The melody was slow, haunting, and beautiful. It didn't sound like anything people had heard before. It wasn't a cover, it wasn't a popular tune, it was something new, but something that also felt strangely familiar. It's like a lullaby from another life. People began to slow down. A man pulling a suitcase stopped walking. A teenager who had been dancing with earbuds took them out. Even the barista from the nearby cafe leaned forward to listen. Daniel continued playing. His hands moved more confidently now, the rhythm picking up, the emotion pouring out with every note. His eyes stayed closed, his body swayed slightly with the melody. He wasn't just playing the song, he was reliving it.
How the piano sang the story of a young love loss, of promises made and broken, of hope and heartbreak.
It was music that reached inside people and touched places words couldn't reach. One by one, more people stopped to listen. Some sat on benches. Others stood with their mouths slightly open, unsure why this song made their chest feel tighter, their eyes sting. It was as if this music was pulling out memories they didn't know they still carried. A man in a suit whispered, "That's not just a song. That's something else." A teenage girl recorded the performance on her phone. Already knowing she had captured something rare, an older woman closed her eyes and smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Daniel didn't notice the attention. He was still with her, with Emily. In his mind, he was young again, in their tiny apartment with the leaky roof. She was laughing. Spinning in the kitchen while he played, she used to say, "Play it like the rain's falling through the trees, Danny. Soft, gentle." That's exactly what he was doing now. The song reached its soft climax, then slowly, tenderly, faded into silence. When the last note fell, the room stayed still. Oh, no one clapped immediately. It was like no one wanted to break the spell. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Soon, the entire station filled with applause. Not the kind people give to celebrities or performers, but something warmer, something grateful. They didn't know who he was, but they knew what he had given them. A moment of pure, honest beauty. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't bow or smile, simply nodded to no one in particular and turned to leave. But the story. It wasn't over. A woman in the crowd watched him closely. Her heart beat faster. She didn't just like the song, she knew it. Or at least, she thought she did. She had heard it once before, many years ago, sung by her cousin Emily. Her name was Carla. And what Daniel didn't realize was that this chance encounter would soon pull back a curtain on a past long buried and reveal a truth that no one, even he, was prepared for. But for now, Daniel disappeared into the crowd again. A simple man, in a coat and cap, blending into the world as if he was no one special. Only a piano remained behind, still carrying the last echo of a forgotten love song. And the people who heard it would never forget the stranger who reminded them that sometimes music can tell stories the world has forgotten and bring them back to life. The moment Daniel Crestwood's fingers touched the keys, everything changed. At first, the notes were soft, like whispers. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. It felt like he was talking to someone long gone, using music. Instead of words, the train station was still noisy announcements, chatter, rolling suitcases, but his melody started to push through the noise. Little by little, the people nearest to the piano heard it first. Some of them paused for just a second, not even realizing why. A businessman walking by looked over his shoulder. A child tugged at his mother's coat and pointed. "Mom, listen." The mother, half distracted by her phone, slowly turned her head toward the piano. Daniel's hands moved slowly, carefully. He wasn't playing any popular song. This wasn't something you'd hear on the radio or in a movie. It wasn't upbeat or flashy, but it had something else feeling. The music was full of emotion, deep and sad and beautiful all at once. Felt like remembering a dream from long ago. The melody reached into people's hearts before they even understood what they were hearing. The song was called "The Willow's Promise," a piece Daniel had written decades ago for the woman he loved, Emily. But no one else in the station knew that. To them, it was just a strange, lovely piece of music. But it made people stop. People who had been in a rush suddenly had no desire to keep walking. They began to slow down. Some stopped completely and turned to watch. A young woman in her 20s, holding a coffee and wearing headphones, pulled them down and stood frozen. "What is that?" she whispered to herself. An older man carrying groceries dropped his bag. Apples rolled across the floor, but he didn't even pick them up right away. His eyes were locked on the man at the piano, even the workers in the nearby cafe stopped what they were doing. A waitress who had been yawning just moments ago leaned forward with her hands on the counter. She'd worked this shift for 2 years and had never seen the piano actually come alive like this. The song grew, stronger. Daniel's fingers danced more freely over the keys now. It was like he was becoming younger as he played, less stiff, less hidden. His shoulders relaxed. His face, though still serious, showed a flicker of light. He didn't look like an old man anymore. He looked like someone reliving something precious. People gathered closer, still unsure of what exactly they were witnessing. But knowing it was special, the man pulled out his phone and started recording. Then another. Someone opened Instagram and began live streaming. Soon more people joined. A small crowd formed in a semicircle around the piano. And still, Daniel played. He played the first part of the song slowly and gently, like the wind blowing through trees. Then the tempo shifted just slightly. A subtle change, like the beginning of spring after a long winter. The melody told a story. Anyone who listened carefully could feel it. There was longing in the notes, but also love. Deep, aching love. The story in the song wasn't clear in words, but it was clear in feeling. The beginning felt like a meeting, or a memory of something beautiful. Then came a section that was full of hope. A series of rising notes like a voice saying, "Someday we'll have it all." But after that came a moment where the notes paused just for a second, and when they returned, they sounded different. It's like sorrow, like loss. The music dropped into a lower range, slower, sadder, and yet even in the sadness, it was beautiful. As if the person playing the song had accepted the pain, had carried it for years, and had finally decided to share it. There was no singing, no lyrics, but the music said everything. In Daniel's mind, he wasn't in Grand Central Station anymore. He was in a small, dusty apartment on the Upper West Side. He could see young Emily sitting by the window, humming the melody back to him. He remembered the first time he played this for her. How her eyes lit up. How she whispered, "It's like you wrote my heart into a song." He had written it for her. Every note.
Back when he believed that love was enough?
Before ambition got in the way. Before he promised her that once he made it, they'd have their time. Before he missed the chance. The crowd didn't know all this, but somehow the emotion came through. A young boy stood beside his mother, holding her hand. Tightly. A woman in a wheelchair wiped her eyes. Even a couple of teenagers, who had been joking moments earlier, were now silent, staring. Moved by something they didn't understand, Daniel played on. He reached the final part of the piece. It didn't end with fireworks or a dramatic high. Note, instead, it softened again, the way it began. Like a leaf falling gently to the ground. The last note stretched out, hung in the air, and slowly faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The entire space felt frozen in time. Then, someone clapped. Another person joined in. Then more. Soon, the whole station was clapping, not just politely, but with real feeling. It wasn't just applause, it was thanks. It's the kind of thanks people give when someone gives them something they didn't even know they needed. Daniel stood up slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He just nodded and stepped back from the piano. But as he did, something strange began to happen. People started whispering, "Who is he?" That wasn't a regular song. "Did you hear the way it made you feel?" "I've never heard anything like that before." A girl with bright red hair asked her friend, "Was that jazz?" "Classical. What was that?" Her friend shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know, but it felt like it knew me." A few feet away, a street musician named Tessa stood still, holding her violin case. She had played in this station many times, but never felt anything like this. Her eyes were fixed on the old man. Something about the song had cracked open an old wound in her heart, something she thought was long buried. The whispers grew louder. Some people began to record videos of him as he walked away. But not everyone was thinking about fame or mystery. Some were simply quiet, letting the feeling of the song settle inside them. People who had lost someone. People who had given up on love. People who were alone. The song had reached them. It had reminded them that someone else had felt what they felt. Even after all these years, something beautiful could come from heartbreak. And then, something even more surprising happened. Carla was sitting on a bench not far from the piano. She had been eating a muffin and reading the news. When she heard the music, at first she didn't think much of it. But then something pulled her in. A sound, a memory. The melody. She knew it. She hadn't heard it in over 30 years. but she knew it. Her eyes widened as she stood up and watched the man playing. Her hands began to shake. When the music ended, she didn't clap. She couldn't. She was too shocked, because she had heard that song once only owned a little jazz club in Brooklyn. Her cousin Emily had sung it there late one night. She had called it The Willow's Promise. She said it was written by the man she loved. Carla never heard it again after Emily died. She always wondered if the man who wrote it ever played it again. And now, here he was, right in front of her. Carla's heart pounded. Could it be? Could this old man really be the same Daniel Crestwood that Emily used to talk about? The one who disappeared after she passed away? She stepped forward, unsure what she would say. She needed to speak to him. She needed to ask. But before she could reach him, Daniel was already disappearing into the crowd, walking slowly, just like when he arrived. He didn't know that someone had recognized the song. He didn't know that a door to his past had just been cracked open. He didn't know that the story he thought was over was only just beginning again. But the people in the station would. Remember, they would tell their families, share the videos, spread the story, and soon the world would begin to ask, who was the man who played the forgotten song? Where did it come from? And why did it feel like the sound of a soul remembering something it had lost long ago? Daniel thought he had simply played a song to say goodbye, but what he didn't realize yet was that the world had been waiting to hear that song, and now everything was about to change. As the sound of the final note faded into the air, the train station was filled with a strange kind of silence. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It was heavy, almost sacred, as if everyone who heard the music was still processing what they had just experienced. For a few moments it felt like time had slowed down. The crowd didn't move, didn't speak. Everyone had been touched in some way by the melody that had come from that old public piano. Daniel Crestwood stood up from the bench quietly. He didn't want attention. He wasn't looking for applause. He had come here only for one reason, to play The Willow's Promise for Emily, the woman he had loved and lost. He had carried that song inside him for decades, hidden away like a secret treasure he was too afraid to share with the world. Today, he had finally let it out. He turned to leave just as a wave of applause started to grow. But Daniel didn't stay to enjoy it. He picked up his suitcase and began walking slowly through the crowd. Some people clapped louder. Others tried to follow him, calling out questions. But Daniel kept his head down and didn't look back. He thought it was over. He didn't realize that what had just happened would become something unforgettable for everyone who was there. He also didn't know that someone in the crowd had recognized the song and, not just emotionally, but personally. That someone was Carla. Carla had been sitting on a bench near the piano. She had come to the station early, planning to catch a train to visit her sister. She wasn't expecting anything unusual. Her life had become routine work, home, and quiet evenings. But the moment she heard the melody, something inside her had shifted. Her hands had started shaking, her heart had begun racing, and memories came flooding back, memories she had buried deep. Years ago, Carla's cousin Emily had been her best friend. Emily was wild and full of life. She was a jazz singer who didn't care about fame, but loved music with all her heart. Carla used to sneak into jazz bars just to hear her sing. Emily had once told Carla about a man she loved deeply, a man named Danny. She described him as a genius, with a heart that was afraid to be vulnerable. A man who wrote her a song that no one else had ever heard. Emily had sung that song to Carla one night long ago, just once. A melody so beautiful it had stayed in her memory like a photograph. She'd never heard it again. Emily died in a car accident just a week after that night, and the mysterious man named Danny disappeared. Carla often wondered who he was, what had happened to him, and whether he had ever truly loved her cousin. Now, standing in Grand Central Station, Carla had just heard the exact same melody played again. The same one from all those years ago. There was no mistake, it was The Willow's Promise. It had to be Danny. But Danny couldn't still be alive. Could he? She rushed through the crowd, her eyes scanning for the man in the coat and cap who had just played the song. She saw him moving toward the exit, blending into the stream of travelers. Carla pushed forward, trying to get closer. "Wait, sir," she called. But her voice was lost in the noise. Daniel didn't hear her. Or maybe he did and chose not to turn around. He stepped onto the escalator. Heading down to the subway level, Carla stood frozen for a second, watching him disappear from view. Her heart was pounding. Should she follow him? Should she try to find him? What would she even say? Back upstairs, the buzz continued to grow. People gathered around the piano, talking in excited whispers. A young man in a hoodie was already uploading the video to YouTube. A woman with a notepad was writing notes, maybe for a blog or an article. A few musicians talked about the chords, the unusual melody, and the feelings it stirred in them. "Did you hear that minor change in the second verse?" one of them said. "I've never heard anything like that in public before," said another. The girl who had live-streamed the whole thing was now answering dozens of messages from people, asking, who was he? What was the song? Where can I find it? No one had the answer. Some guessed he was a professional pianist traveling through. Others said he might be homeless, but gifted. A few thought he might be mentally ill, playing a tune stuck in his head. But none of those guesses felt right. The truth was more complicated and far more incredible. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through the lower level of the station, his thoughts spinning. He didn't expect the reaction he got. When he had first sat at the piano, he only wanted to say goodbye to the past, to the music, to Emily. He never imagined the melody would reach so many strangers so deeply. As he walked, he remembered the way Emily used to smile when he played for her, the way she closed her eyes and leaned her head on his shoulder afterward. "This song will live forever," she had whispered once, "even if we don't." That line haunted him now. She had believed in the music more than he had. He had buried it, locked it away with the pain. It had touched people exactly the way she always said it would. He found a quiet bench in a far corner of the station and sat down, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his coat. He didn't care about being seen. He just needed to breathe. The emotions were two strong memories, regrets, lost time. He wondered if Emily would have been proud of him today, if she somehow saw what had happened. Back upstairs, Carla was still searching. She had decided she had to find him. She couldn't just let this moment pass. She spoke to some people in the crowd, asking if they knew who the man was or where he went. "I think he went down to the subway level," one teenager said. "He had a suitcase," someone else added. "I recorded the whole thing," another girl offered and showed Carla the video on her phone. Carla watched the video, tears forming in her eyes. It was him. It had to be. Everything Emily had told her about Danny, the way he played, the emotion, the way he poured his soul into the piano, was right there. Suddenly, a new memory came to Carla, something she hadn't thought about in years. One night, Emily had shown her a photograph, a picture of her and Danny on a park bench. Emily was laughing, and Danny was looking at her with eyes full of love. Carla had seen the photo only once, but now the face in her memory and the man in the video matched. Older, yes, but still the same. She had no more doubts. The man at the piano was Daniel Crestwood, the same man who had once been one of the most powerful tech minds in the world, and the man who had loved her cousin with all his heart. But why had he vanished? Why now? Why come back and play the song after all these years? Carla didn't know the answers yet, but she was determined to find them. She made her way to the subway level, scanning every corner, food stalls and waiting areas, looking for a man with a suitcase and a cap. Finally, she saw him, sitting alone on a bench, hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. She walked slowly toward him. Her legs felt weak, her throat dry. She didn't know how to begin. But when she got close enough, she softly said, "Excuse, Me, where did you learn that song? Daniel looked up slowly. His eyes were tired but sharp. He studied her face. Something in it stirred a memory. He didn't answer right away. Carla stepped closer. You played a song? The Willow's Promise? I know that song, my cousin, Emily. She sang it once. You wrote it, didn't you? The moment Daniel heard Emily's name, his expression changed completely. His breath caught in his throat. Emily, he whispered, almost as if the name itself was a fragile thing. Yes, Carla said gently. I'm her cousin. She used to talk about you. She called you Danny. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice was rough. You knew her? Did. She was like a sister to me. I remember the night she sang that song. She said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her. Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes. He hadn't heard her name spoken in years. He hadn't allowed himself to talk about her with anyone. She forgave you, you know, Carla said softly. Daniel looked up, surprised. She did. Carla nodded. She knew you loved her. She never blamed you. She always believed you'd come back to her someday. Daniel closed his eyes, and a tear ran down his cheek. In that moment, everything he had carried for decades, the guilt, the sorrow, the silence, began to lift, piece by piece. They sat in silence for a while. Then Carla said, The world needs to hear that song. Danny, not just once, not just in a train station. It deserves to live. For Emily. For you. For all the people who heard it today and felt something change. Daniel looked at her and gave the smallest nod, for the first time in a long time. He felt like something was beginning instead of ending, and neither of them knew it yet. But that one song once buried and forgotten was about to reach far beyond one station, one city, or even one country. It was about to touch the world. The moment Carla spoke Emily's name, Daniel Crestwood felt as if the floor beneath him had disappeared. He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud by anyone in over 30 years, not since the night she died, not since the night he lost everything that ever really mattered to him. For a long time he had convinced himself he could forget, that time would heal. Hiding away from the world was the only way to keep himself from falling apart. But hearing Emily again, especially from someone who clearly knew her, brought everything back with full force. He sat silently on the bench in the quiet corner of the subway level, trying to understand what was happening. The woman in front of him, Carla, stood patiently, giving him space, not rushing him. She had just told him something impossible, that she was Emily's cousin, that she had heard the Willow's Promise long ago, and that she remembered it perfectly, that Emily had talked about him, that she had forgiven him. Daniel's lips trembled. His voice came out in a whisper. Emily talked about me, even after all those years. Carla nodded. Her eyes softened. She never stopped. She believed in you, even when you were gone. She said you had a good heart, just lost in the noise of the world. Daniel lowered his head, rubbing his hands together slowly, trying to hold back the tears. I didn't mean to disappear, he said softly. I just didn't know how to live without her. After she died, everything I built, everything I worked for it, felt worthless. The company, the money, none of it mattered anymore. Carla sat down beside him. She didn't say anything at first. She just let him sit with the weight of those memories. I built $1 billion empire, Daniel said quietly. But I lost the only person who ever truly loved me for who I was, not what I could give. Carla nodded gently. Emily didn't want money or fame. She wanted music. She wanted real moments. That song you wrote, The Willow's Promise, was her favorite thing in the world. I remember the way she closed her eyes when she sang it, like it was a secret between just the two of you. Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with pain. I never played it again. Not since she died. I locked it away. I thought if I played, it would break me, but it didn't, Carla said softly. You played it today, and it didn't break you. It healed others. Did you see their faces, Daniel? The way people stopped, the way they listened. That song still speaks even. After all these years, it still matters. Daniel looked away, blinking back more tears. I didn't expect that. I just needed to feel close to her again. Carla reached into her bag and pulled out something, a small photo. She held it out to him. Do you Remember this? Daniel took it with shaking hands. It was a black and white picture worn at the edges, but still clear. It was of him and Emily, sitting together on a park bench. Emily was laughing, her head tilted back, and Daniel had his arm around her, smiling. He hadn't seen this photo in over 30 years. He remembered the day it was taken. They had spent the whole afternoon in Central Park, talking about dreams, fears, the future. She gave this to me the week before she died, Carla said. She told me to keep it safe, in case one day someone needed to remember who she really is. Was? Daniel stared at the photo, his fingers trembling. She was everything. Carla smiled sadly. I know. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt like the beginning of something, the reopening of a door that had been shut for too long. Finally, Carla said, You need to share this song, Daniel. It's not just yours anymore. It belongs to her memory. And it belongs to the world. Daniel nodded slowly. But how? It's never been written down. I never recorded it. Emily was the only one who ever heard it. Until today. Carla smiled. You still remember every note. You played it perfectly. Only remember it because I never let it go, he said. I thought I buried it, but it lived inside me. Then let's bring it back to life, Carla said. It's not just for Emily, but for everyone. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He checked into a modest hotel just a few blocks away from the station. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the old photo Carla had given him. He stared at Emily's smile, remembering the sound of her laughter, the softness of her voice, the way she used to trace his hand with her fingers when they sat together. For hours, he thought about what to do next. He no longer had a team of assistants or a media team. He had stepped away from the tech world years ago. He had something better now, a story, a song, a purpose. The next morning, he called Carla. Meet me at the Community Music Center on East 12th, he said. I have an idea. The music. The center was small, a humble building tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Inside, the place smelled like wood and old sheet music. Kids practiced on secondhand instruments. A young teacher guided a group of students through their first piano lesson. It was nothing like the high-class studios Daniel once visited in his prime. But it had heart. And that was enough. Daniel introduced himself to the director of the center, a kind man named Mr. Alvarez. He explained who he was, what had happened, and what he wanted to do. At first, Mr. Alvarez was stunned. Wait, the Daniel Crestwood. The tech guy. You're saying you wrote that song? Daniel nodded. It was never recorded, never shared. But I want to record it now here with you. And I want all the rights and profits to go to young musicians who can't afford to chase their dreams. Mr. Alvarez agreed immediately. They cleared a room and brought in the best piano. They had an old Steinway that had been donated by a retired jazz musician. Daniel sat down and took a deep breath. Carla watched from the doorway. Then he played The Willows Promise Again. This time with a microphone recording every note. It was even more beautiful the second time. Mr. Alvarez was speechless. The sound engineer had tears in his eyes. Carla couldn't stop smiling. After the recording, Tanya asked one simple request. Credit it to Emily. List her as the inspiration. Let the world know it came from her soul. And so they did. Within days, the recording began to spread. Carla uploaded it to YouTube and explained the story in the description. This is the song my cousin Emily loved. It's written by the man who vanished after she died. Played again in a train station 30 years later, people were moved not just by the song, but by the story behind it. News outlets picked it up. Unknown. Pianist at Grand Central turns out to be disgraced tech billionaire Daniel Crestwood. Love song from the past moves millions. Who was Emily? The jazz singer who inspired a masterpiece? Music producers reached out. Podcasts told the story. People all over the world began using the song in their own videos, weddings, funerals, memorials, even dance performances. One music blogger wrote, The Willows Promise is not just a song. It's a love letter across time. A promise kept. After decades of silence, and the man who played it, he didn't just play a melody, he played his soul. Daniel didn't seek fame. He didn't give interviews. But he did agree to one live performance. He returned to Grand Central Station. 1 month later, with the same coat and suitcase, and sat at the same piano. This time, hundreds of people were waiting. Cameras, reporters, families, musicians. In the front row dashed Carla. Daniel played the song one final time in public. When he finished, the applause was deafening. But Daniel didn't wave or speak. He just placed a single white rose on top of the piano, stood and whispered to the crowd, "For Emily." Then he walked away. That night, Daniel met Carla for tea. He looked peaceful, lighter, you know. He said, "I thought my story ended a long time ago. I never imagined music would bring me back to life." Carla smiled. It's never too late for a new chapter. And so Daniel continued to live quietly, but not in hiding anymore. Visited schools, funded scholarships, mentored young musicians. He told Emily's story wherever he went. He didn't need to be remembered for the company he built or the billions he once earned. He wanted to be remembered for the promise he finally kept, and the world did remember through a song, through a story, through a melody that refused to die. The day Daniel Crestwood returned to Grand Central Station for his second public performance was nothing short of magical. A full month had passed since he first sat down at that old, dusty piano and poured out decades of love, loss, and emotion through his fingers. That performance had awakened not just his own heart, but the hearts of thousands. Videos of the mysterious old man playing a forgotten love song had gone viral. Music lovers, romantic souls, young dreamers, and old storytellers had all felt something deep in their chest when they listened to The Willow's Promise. That second performance wasn't supposed to be a big event. Daniel had only agreed to return for one more moment of closure for himself and for Emily. But by the time he reached the station, he was stunned by what he saw. Hundreds of people had gathered. Some carried flowers. Some held signs that read, "Thank you for the song." A few wore t-shirts with printed lines like "She never stopped loving you" or "For Emily." Some were there because they loved the music. Others had been touched by the story. Few were musicians themselves. But many had come simply to witness something they didn't know how to describe, something real, honest, and deeply human. Daniel moved slowly through the crowd, wearing the same brown coat and cap he had worn the first time. A few people recognized him and asked for a photo, but he gently declined. This wasn't about celebrity. It wasn't about him. It was about a song that had once been a private gift between two people, now becoming a bridge between hearts across the world. He reached the piano and paused. A white rose was already resting on it. He smiled softly, picked it up, and held it to his chest before placing it back down. Then he sat. The crowd fell silent. People held their breath. The cameras pointed. Even the background noise of the station, the announcements, the chatter. The rolling bag seemed to soften, and then Daniel played. The melody began the same way it always did, gentle, patient, full of longing. But this time, the world was listening with new ears. They already knew the story now. They knew about Emily, about the song, about the billionaire who walked away from everything. So every note carried deeper meaning. Some people in the audience closed their eyes. Others wept openly. Strangers held hands. Mother hugged her daughter. Tighter, an older couple, married 50 years, leaned against one another, remembering their own beginnings. The music didn't belong to just one man anymore. It belonged to everyone. When Daniel reached the final part of the song, the part that spoke of letting go, he hesitated for a single heartbeat. Then he played it perfectly, like a whisper, like a goodbye. And when the last note ended, the station remained still for several seconds. Then the clapping began, soft at first, then stronger, louder, more emotional. People stood to applaud. Some cheered, some simply cried. And Daniel stood up slowly, bowed his head once, and whispered the words that would stay with them forever. For Emily. Then he walked away. Carla was waiting for him outside. She hugged him tightly, and for the first time, Daniel didn't feel broken by the past. He felt at peace. But the journey didn't end there. In fact, it was only just beginning. The next morning, news of the performance spread like wildfire. Headlines appeared across the internet. Daniel Crestwood's final performance brings train station to tears. The love song that took 30 years to be heard by the world. It's from billionaire to balladeer, the story of a man who found his soul in a song. Radio stations began to play the newly recorded version of The Willow's Promise. Streaming services added it to their most popular playlists. The music wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't produced with heavy beats or fancy effects. But that's what made it different. It was raw, pure, emotional, and people couldn't stop listening. A popular music critic wrote, "In an era of noise and artificial perfection, this song reminds us that real emotion still matters. That love doesn't fade. At a piano, some trembling fingers, and a broken heart can still make the world pause." People began writing letters, hundreds, then thousands. Some wrote to thank Daniel. Others wrote to Emily, even though she was gone, sharing their stories, their regrets, their hopes. Some even wrote about promises they had forgotten but were now inspired to keep. And then came the unexpected moment. The Willow's Promise was nominated for a Grammy Award. The nomination came in the category of Best Instrumental Composition. And though Daniel had never sought recognition, the world insisted on giving it to him. The music had touched too many people to be ignored. Daniel was shocked when he heard the news. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he visited Emily's grave. It had been many years since he had gone there. The headstone was simple, overgrown with grass and flowers. He knelt beside it and said, "They heard it, Emily, just like you said they would. We're right." He didn't attend the awards ceremony, but when the song won, Carla accepted the trophy on his behalf. She said only 3 words into the microphone. "This is Emily's." Daniel's life took a new shape in the months that followed. He didn't return to the tech world. He didn't accept interviews or offers to sell the song rights to record labels. Instead, he chose a quieter path. He began visiting music schools across the country, small ones and struggling communities. He never arrived with cameras or security, never told them who he was until he sat at the piano and played. He met students who had never owned their own instruments, kids who came from broken homes but found healing in music, teachers who worked 2 jobs just to keep the school open. Daniel listened to their stories, sat beside them, and taught them how to express feeling through notes instead of words. He encouraged them to write their own songs, not to impress anyone, but to remember what mattered. He used the royalties from the song to create the Emily Fund, a program that provided free instruments, lessons, and scholarships to young musicians around the world. Every time a child picked up a violin, a guitar, or sat at a piano, Emily's spirit lived on. Carla helped him manage the fund. They became close friends, like family. Daniel even moved into a small guest house near Carla's home so they could work together. He kept the original piano recording framed in his study. Along with the photo of him and Emily, he looked at it every morning and whispered, "Thank you." People began calling Daniel the quiet savior of music, but he never accepted praise. When asked why he did it, he always said the same thing: "Because someone once believed in me. I didn't want to waste that." Years passed. Daniel grew older, but his mind stayed sharp. His hands still danced on the piano keys. He continued to travel to music schools, sharing his story and his song, not because he wanted to be remembered, but because he wanted others to believe that even the deepest pain could create the most beautiful music. One day, at a small recital for blind children learning piano, a little girl asked him, "Is that song about a happy ending or a sad one?" Daniel smiled. "Both," he said. "It's about love that didn't get to finish, but never died." The girl tilted her head. "Did you miss her a lot?" Daniel's eyes softened. "I still do. But now I carry her with me. Every time I play, she's right here." That night, as Daniel sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the stars, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He had once thought life ended when Emily died, that everything after her was just silence. But now he knew the truth. Her love had waited quietly inside him, not demanding, not loud, just patient, like the roots of a tree growing underground. When he finally let the music out, those roots turned into branches. The branches gave shade and comfort and beauty to the world, all because of one promise and one song. Daniel passed away. Quietly in his sleep 2 years later, he was found with a notebook on his bedside table. Inside were handwritten letters to dozens of students, notes about their progress and encouragement for their future. The very last page held a single line, written in his careful handwriting: "I kept the promise, Emily." At his funeral, Carla arranged for the Willows' promise to be played by a group of students who had received scholarships from the Emily Fund. The performance was soft, perfect, full of heart, just the way Daniel would have wanted. As the final note echoed across the small chapel, no one spoke. There were tears, smiles, nods of understanding. The world had lost a man but gained a song that would never fade, and somewhere, perhaps beyond this world, a young woman named Emily smiled again, hearing the promise fulfilled at last.